The Ozarks does not give up its secrets easily. Ask someone who grew up in the deep hollows of Douglas County or Shannon County or Taney County what their parents told them about certain places, certain roads, certain communities, certain spots where the creek bends in a particular way or the trees get close enough to block the light, and what you get is not a tourist brochure. What you get is a warning, sometimes a specific one with a name and a direction and a reason, sometimes just a look that tells you the question itself was a mistake. The Ozarks has always held things that the outside world doesn't know about, not because anyone is hiding them, but because the hills are old, and the communities that grew up inside them developed their own understanding of what the land holds. Some of that understanding looks like folklore. Some of it is documented in government records. Some of it is sitting right now behind military fencing where no civilian can legally enter. These are 11 villages in the Ozarks that locals know to approach carefully, or not at all. Subscribe right now, hit the button and the bell. The first is a place that no longer exists because the United States government erased it. Bloodland was a small community in Pulaski County in the Missouri Ozarks, established in the late 19th century and named for a Mr. Blood, who was among its founders. By the early 20th century, it had grown into a functioning rural settlement. Families, farms, a church, the particular web of relationships that makes a place a community rather than a location. Then World War II began, and the Army needed land in the Missouri Ozarks to build Fort Leonard Wood. The residents of Bloodland were given notice to leave. The government needed the land. The families packed what they could carry and went. The town was cleared. The military base was built around and over what Bloodland had been, and the land disappeared behind fencing and guard posts and the legal authority of the United States Army. The church bell, the one thing that survived, was relocated to the nearby town of Waynesville, where it still stands as the only physical remnant of an Ozarks community that was simply removed from the map. What the Army did not remove were the stories that came out of the training areas built where Bloodland used to be. Personnel stationed at Fort Leonard Wood have reported hauntings in those areas since the 1940s, not visitors, soldiers, people stationed there, people with no particular reason to invent ghost stories about a place they are required to live. The specific character of the reported activity lines up with the particular kind of haunting that comes from a community that was taken rather than abandoned. The land is still an active military installation. You cannot enter. Bloodland is still there in the sense that it has never been properly addressed. The Army built on top of it and moved on. 9 miles south of Avilla in Douglas County, on a dirt road along South Spring Creek, sits what remains of a community called Smalllet. It has a bridge. It has the remnants of a general store. Beyond that, Smalllet has faded into the Ozarks the way small communities fade when the roads improve and the reasons to stop there disappear. What it has not lost is the legend, or more precisely, the warning that was passed through the families who grew up around it for over a century. The headless cobbler of Smalllet Cave is what the folklorists call it. The apparition of a headless figure with shoes where his head should be, documented in written records since at least the turn of the 20th century, reported by residents walking the gravel back roads at dusk for generations. Inside Smalllet Cave, locals heard the tapping of cobbler's tools from underground, a rhythmic sound with no explanation. And alongside the cobbler came something else, a red light, reported by independent witnesses across multiple generations, appearing near the road and the creek in a way that had nothing to do with vehicles or electricity in the years before either existed in these hills. A local elder whose family had lived in the area for generations delivered the specific warning that has outlasted everything else about Smallett. His exact words passed down and eventually documented by researchers: "If you ever see a red light, run." That sentence was not said for effect. It was said as practical instruction from someone who had grown up knowing that the area around Smalllet Creek held something the community had decided not to investigate too closely. Hit the like button. It tells the algorithm this story matters. The third village is not abandoned at all. It still exists technically. It has a church, a cemetery, and a community center. What it also has is something that has appeared on the road outside it for over 140 years, and that no scientific investigation has been able to explain. The community of Hornet in Newton County sits near the Missouri-Oklahoma-Kansas tri-state corner, 11 miles southwest of Joplin. On a 4-mile stretch of road outside Hornet, a glowing orb of light has appeared to residents and visitors since at least 1881, documented in print long before automobiles existed on these roads. It is known by 6 different names in 6 different communities, which is itself a measure of how many separate groups of people have encountered it and needed a word for it. The Army Corps of Engineers investigated it. University researchers have studied it. Physicists have proposed mechanisms. None of the proposed explanations fully account for all documented behaviors, including the pre-automobile reports. Locals who grew up near Hornet do not find it dramatic. A man named Charles Dawes, whose family lived on E40 Road for years, told a researcher, "I grew up with it and saw it 1,000 times. I never paid much attention to it." Another family reported it appearing on their porch and lighting up their bedroom. One morning before dawn, a man drinking coffee saw what he described as 2 big red eyes at his front window. The light is not a tourist trap. It is a permanent feature of the Ozarks landscape that the community around Hornet has simply learned to coexist with, the way communities coexist with anything old enough to have been there before anyone currently alive was born. On the Upper Current River in Shannon County, accessible only by walking a remote trail through the Ozark National Scenic Riverways or arriving by canoe, there is a stone building with barred windows that was built inside a spring and abandoned in the 1930s. A doctor constructed the Welch Spring Hospital in the early 20th century because he believed that the cold, pure water flowing from the spring had healing properties that could help patients with tuberculosis recover. He built stone walls, cut windows and doorways, installed bars over the openings, and created a facility where the patients lived beside the spring and drank the water. The tuberculosis did not respond. The hospital closed. The structure was left because it was too remote to demolish and too solid to deteriorate quickly. It has been sitting beside the current river for nearly a century since then, the spring still flowing through its foundation, the barred windows still intact, the stone walls still standing in a stretch of Ozarks River corridor that most people will never see. What makes Welch Spring worth noting is not just its visual quality, though it is one of the most striking abandoned structures in Missouri, but the specific character of its isolation. To reach it requires a deliberate effort. The trail is not well marked. The river current is not always predictable. The Scenic Riverways designation means it cannot be developed or altered, which means it will continue sitting exactly as it is for as long as the stones hold. No path to it is obvious. No sign points to it. Most people who float the current river pass it without knowing it is there. The 5th community is underwater. Old Lynn Creek was the original county seat of Camden County, a functioning town on the Osage River with a courthouse, churches, a school, stores, and families who had lived in the river valley for generations. In 1929, construction began on Bagnell Dam. In 1931, the dam was completed and the Lake of the Ozarks filled. Old Lynn Creek, the courthouse, the churches, the cemetery went under. The families who had lived there were compensated and relocated, in most cases to higher ground nearby. The community that had existed in the river valley was dissolved by the rising water in a matter of days. A local legend has persisted since the flooding. On still days, when the lake is quiet and the light comes down through the water in a certain way, people say you can hear the old church bell ringing from below the surface. The bell cannot ring. The church has been underwater for over 90 years, and there is nothing left of it that could produce sound. But the legend persists specifically because of the nature of what happened to Old Lynn Creek. The town was not abandoned. It was taken, and the communities that surround Lake of the Ozarks today, many of them built by families who relocated from the valley, have carried the memory of what is underneath the water in the form of a story about a sound that cannot exist. In March of 1920, a tornado struck the small community of Melva in Taney County and killed 11 people. 9 of them were children. Melva sat on the east bank of Turkey Turkey Creek, south of Hollister, built around a rail stop and populated by bridge workers, loggers, orchard workers, and lead miners who worked the numerous small mines in the surrounding hills. It was a functioning community with a hotel run by the Buell family, a school, a Presbyterian missionary named Lucy Woods, and the ordinary infrastructure of an Ozarks town at the turn of the 20th century. When the tornado came, it destroyed the community comprehensively. The dead children were pulled from Turkey Creek and transported by train to Branson. The survivors did not rebuild. The community that had existed at that location simply ended. What remains at Melva today is ruins. The post office foundation, the outlines of homes in the overgrowth, the creek still running past the site where the children drowned in the aftermath. The White River Valley Historical Society has documented what happened there, and locals in southern Taney County know the story, but Melva does not appear on any current map and is not marked by any sign. Phoenix in Greene County was a marble mining town that contributed stone to the Missouri state capitol. It was also a company town, meaning the mining company owned the general store, the school buildings, the civic properties, and the homes. When the company's fortunes declined in the early 1900s, the town's residents reportedly dispersed in a remarkably short period that local sources describe as practically overnight. No single clean explanation for the speed of abandonment exists in the historical record. Stone ruins of the old structures still stand, along with dilapidated remnants visible to anyone willing to find the site between Walnut Grove and Ash Grove. Bonnie Parker of Bonnie and Clyde is documented to have attended elementary school in Phoenix. She would eventually rob a bank approximately 10 minutes away in Ash Grove. Avilla in Lawrence County sits along the original alignment of Route 66 with a current population of approximately 125 people and a number of documented additional residents who are not technically living. The most specific of these is a Confederate bushwhacker known to locals as Rotten Johnny Reb, whose skull was reportedly cut from his body after his death and hung on what the community called the death tree, as a specific warning to others who might follow his example. The curse attached to the skull, that his spirit cannot rest until the skull is found and properly interred, has never been resolved because the location of the death tree died with the last Civil War survivors who knew it. Shadow people are separately reported walking the abandoned buildings along Avila's old commercial street. The town sits close enough to Route 66 to draw occasional visitors, and far enough from anything else that it feels, even today, like a place the main road left behind for reasons that were not entirely geographic. Jolification was a Newton County community built around a distillery in the mid-1800s, named for a documented incident involving a lawyer and considerable amounts of locally produced spirits. It was the site of Civil War violence and documented burnings. The Jolly Mill that anchored its economy survived and now sits on the National Register of Historic Places. The rest of the community did not. What Jolification offers that most Ozarks ghost towns do not is a name that functions as its own disarming detail. The kind of name that sounds like a joke until you read what actually happened there. Garber, a few miles west of what is now Branson, is preserved inside the Ruth and Paul Henning Conservation Area. Henning was the Hollywood television writer who created the Beverly Hillbillies and modeled the show's characters on the Ozarks Hill, people he knew personally. He purchased the land and donated it to conservation. What the conservation area now protects includes the ruins of the former railroad community of Garber, weathered structures, frontier-era cemeteries, the particular silence of a place that once had people in it and does not anymore. Almost no visitor to Branson knows it exists. Almost no hiking guide mentions it. The town that inspired characters known by millions of American television viewers is itself unknown. The 11th and final community is perhaps the strangest entry on this list for a specific reason. Zanoni in Ozark County has a state road sign. The Missouri Department of Transportation placed a green road sign on the highway welcoming travelers to Zanoni. The sign is real. The welcome is genuine in the sense that it was officially authorized and installed. But the sign does not accurately mark where Zanoni is, or rather, where Zanoni was. The community has effectively ceased to exist, while the official state apparatus acknowledging its existence continues to stand on the road pointing toward it. You can drive to the Zanoni sign, read the welcome, continue in the direction it implies you should go, and find nothing that constitutes a community in any functional sense. The state of Missouri is still welcoming visitors to a place that is no longer there to be visited. The Ozarks holds more than it shows. It always has. These 11 communities are not the only ones. They are the ones where the history is documented, the warnings are specific, and the geography is precise enough to find on a map. There are others in the hollows and along the creeks that have not been written about by anyone, that exist only in the memory of the families who grew up near them, that carry warnings passed down in the specific oral tradition of the Ozarks Hills that Vance Randolph spent decades collecting before it disappeared entirely. The hills are old, the stories are older, and the places that hold them are not always the ones on the tourist map. Subscribe if you haven't. Hit the bell. Drop a comment. Have you been to any of these? Do you know a place that should be on the next list? Because the Ozarks keeps more than it gives up, and we are still finding things. Thank you for watching. The truth doesn't shout. It waits for you to look closer.